Up next, to discuss the future of 5G in cities, please welcome Shireen Santosham, Chief Information Officer for the City of San Jose. Joining her on stage is author and journalist John Donvan.
Thanks, everybody. Hi, Shireen.
Hello.
So your title, you represent the city of San Jose, California, which is relevant for a couple of reasons we'll be talking about. Your title is Chief Innovation Officer, right? Which sounds incredibly aspirational. And also, it's a job that didn't exist 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, to the degree to which you're kind of figuring it out as you go along, what the job actually means. What are your aspirations for this position?
Well, I think there's about 100 of us in this room, and 2/3 of us don't have job descriptions, is what we learned at the Innovator Studio yesterday. So, being a Chief Innovation Officer in Silicon Valley is really trying to be as innovative as the community in which we live. So how do we engage with our tech community? How do we use tech tools to better service our residents? And really balancing sort of the pace of technology innovation with what's good for people and our residents.
So ultimately, you feel that your responsibility is to the residents of San Jose, primarily?
Absolutely.
And you also said at a certain point not too long ago, last year, after serving on an FCC panel that was supposedly working towards some of the goals that you would have as the Chief Innovation Officer of San Jose, you resigned. And you said that the FCC has sold us out. What went wrong there? And then we'll talk about how to make it right.
As many of you know, Mayor Liccardo was appointed to an FCC advisory board around broadband deployment, which is supposed to be a cross-section of the American public, so companies, but also community groups, local governments. And what happened when we were appointed to that body is Mayor Liccardo was the only local government representative out of a group of 30. And so throughout the process, which lasted, we were on the advisory board for about 9 months. They appointed one or two other local government officials. There were investigative reports by the Center for Public Integrity, multiple news articles. I was asked to testify before Congress on local government representation. And ultimately, what happened is that this FCC really, as we've seen, is not interested in serving the public in the way that we would want, whether it's rolling back net neutrality restrictions or privacy restrictions or even things like E-rate, Lifeline. And so we ultimately decided, after talking to the mayor, we decided to step off that advisory board and decided to go back to San Jose and really invest in our local community. And so what we did is we went and we negotiated agreements with all the major telecoms, and we will be what we believe to be the largest 5G deployment in the country. We'll have about 4,200 small cells across the city. We are actually retooling our permitting process, so we're getting to market at about 20 to 30 days, so twice as fast as FCC shot clocks. And then we decided to take the money that we had left and invest it in our community and create the largest digital inclusion fund in the country. So we will connect and build the digital skills of 50,000 residents in San Jose and aim to close the digital divide in our city in 10 years.
So I want to let that happen. Sorry. I didn't mean to step on your applause. Sorry. To go back very briefly, when you said that you were the only municipal representation on the FCC, so who were the rest of the people on that board, and what was their charge? What was that panel supposed to be about?
It was the Broadband Deployment Advisory Committee, and their charge was around how do you deploy broadband, small cells and 5G quickly, and specifically looking at local government regulations around it.
And who else was comprised that panel?
It was largely industry representatives.
Okay, so it seems that part of your complaint was not only what they were doing, but the composition of the panel being largely industry representatives. And yet, as you just told us, you went back to San Jose, and you began to find a way to work with industry. I think you're saying that was an important part of what you did. So what principles did you apply in working with industry, and what are some of the projects that you got off the ground?
Sure. I mean, first is, San Jose is a place where we thrive on technology and our private sector companies. So we have about 800 technology companies in the city. And so, we absolutely need to work with industry. But we also need to make sure that, I think all of us in this room feel that the pace of technology change is happening really quickly, and how do we make sure that we're balancing this technology innovations with what's good for people? And so that's really why we decided to be really thoughtful about as we charge sort of fair market rates around our infrastructure, how do we use that money to then lift up our entire community? And I really give credit to the leadership of our mayor and our council. We had a unanimous vote on creating the Digital Inclusion Fund. And we'll be giving out, it'll be about a $24 million fund. We're giving out the first $1 million to our community right now, so the application is open. And we're really hoping that that's going to change the dynamic around the fact that we live in Silicon Valley, but it's really like two valleys because, for example, only about 5% of Silicon Valley executives are Latinx, yet we live in a city that's 34% Latinx. And so what that means is that children born in our city, children born in Silicon Valley don't have a pathway to Silicon Valley jobs. We have about 100,000 residents that are not online with broadband.
100,000?
Yeah.
So that's like 10% of the city's population.
It's about 10% of the city's population. It's over half our low-income population. And so we really need to do something about this. And so that's why we created this fund.
So just the fact that half the city's, 10% of the city's population is not online, obviously those are families. Those schools are requiring kids to be online to do homework now, are they not?
Yeah, almost all schools in our area require homework online, and that's just the reality. And we hear so many stories of kids trying to do their homework on a cell phone because that's all their family can afford. And you literally hear phrases like, well, I tried, but usually I just give up. It's very common, and so that really shouldn't be happening in our community.
I mean, it's obviously it's not something that anybody wants happening in any community, but the fact that it's happening in San Jose, the capital of Silicon Valley, says what to you?
It says that something's wrong and that we really need to change the way that we're looking at progress. And, we're having a national conversation about inequality, and Silicon Valley is sort of the canary in the coal mine, I think, for the rest of the country around what can happen. And so we feel a very strong obligation that we need to address it in Silicon Valley and then, take that to the rest of the country.
So your project right now seems to be focused on this inclusion fund. You referred to it a few times. So what is it? What's its scope? What's its size? What's its purpose? And what has unfolded with it?
Yeah, it's giving out $1 to $2 million a year for 10 years to community organizations or nonprofits or public agencies to close the digital divide around digital literacy, so a lot of coding camps or digital skills or connecting seniors, as well as service connectivity and devices, as well as educating our population around why it's important to get online. And this is the culmination, really, of 3 years of research. So we were very methodical about this. So we went out and did street surveys. We worked with Stanford University to get really robust data. As you know, the data that's available around the digital divide is not very good. And so, we went out and surveyed over 600 low-income families to really understand access and use in the city around the internet. And then we also did, really robust analysis around the broadband market.
So if you found yourself not satisfied, you and the mayor found yourselves not satisfied with the performance and the commitment of the companies when you were on the FCC panel, now that you're back in San Jose concentrating there, are you finding that the private firms are in any way more cooperative or working in a way that's more conducive to your goals? Are you having to crack a whip over them? Are you having to use incentives for them? So how does that interaction happen now that you're back focusing in San Jose?
The reality is private businesses are there to make a profit and to move their business along quickly. And so you really need to, when you're partnering with private companies, understand their incentives. And in the case of telecommunications firms, it's really around deploying their networks very quickly. And so that's why I mentioned earlier in the conversation that we're actually deploying the networks twice as fast as what the FCC recommends. So really, we're going to have close to 1,000 small cells deployed by the end of this year. And then the second thing is testing new technology and services. So telecommunications firms right now are really interested in IoT devices, especially as we move to 5G. And so we do have, as part of our agreements with them, to take about $4 million in-kind IoT services that help them prove out their business case. And so if you're meeting those needs, you know, we're being good partners to them, they're being good partners to us. And so it's been a really good thing, I think, for both sides. And we actually have some of those firms that we're working with on the advisory board to our Digital Inclusion Fund.
And are you satisfied with their way they're cooperating?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to go to audience questions in just a couple of moments, so all you would need to do is raise your hand, and I believe in this room we'll have a microphone brought to you. It's in the back. But before we do that, I just want to very briefly touch on the issue of 5G, because you've mentioned that that's the thrust of the improvisation. Sorry, the innovation that you're working on right now. Talk about just the challenges of 5G. Is it an especially challenging step forward to take, or do you have it all in hand? Is it absolutely critical, by the way, for the outcomes that you want, which is, for example, you know, bridging the digital divide?
So 5G is, I think, you know, everyone in this room who works in cities probably realizes this, but a lot of times the general public might not realize that it's a massive construction project. The density of small cells, as well as the fiber that's required to get to the small cells, means that you are actually doing a massive construction project in your city. And so that part is a challenge. It does require streamlining the permitting process and figuring out how to deploy quickly. 5G is hyped quite a bit, I'd say, in the media. I think it is a technology that will be very useful in unlocking innovations around IoT, you know, eventually autonomous vehicles. But today, it's really more just video and sort of an incremental benefit. And I think that in terms of the digital divide, if we don't address the digital divide now, 5G can actually deepen the digital divide because it's going to be more expensive. It requires special kinds of smartphones that people won't be able to necessarily afford. And so I think now is the time to address this issue.
So 5G could, if not handled well, could make things worse from the point of view of the digital divide.
Yes.
Any questions that we'd like to go to? Right here, thanks.
Hi, Stéphane Guédouin from the City of Montreal. I wanted to know if, in the discussion with the telecommunicators, if you try to have a deal in terms of accessing 5G for public safety, for example. So against the fact that you give access to the infrastructure, have in return a kind of low-cost or zero-cost access to 5G to have a private network or something like that that allows you to support the police department and so on.
Sure. So first of all, just to clarify, right now the small cells that we've deployed are 4G LTE. We will have AT&T come in early next year to upgrade them all to 5G. So just want to make that clarification point. On the idea of public safety issues, one of the things that the city of San Jose is being very careful about is around privacy. And so we are in the midst of writing privacy policies for the city. We've just released privacy principles. So things like, you know, cameras, we're not yet deploying them from a public safety standpoint until we have our privacy policy in place. What we do have are things like earthquake sensors, dynamic lighting for parks, so that it's safer that way, but not so much on the camera use.
Question. There's one down in the front row, or do you have one? I'm sorry, you go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, Brian Dillett, Chief Innovation Officer for the City of San Antonio. So we're currently doing a digital divide assessment, and thanks, Shireen, for being a great example, and San Jose for being a great example. Is there anything after the assessment, and we're doing it with UTSA, who I just happen to have our liaison sitting next to me today, coincidentally. Is there anything that you identified or didn't identify from that assessment that you wish you would have added into the assessment process? And also, how are you continuing to assess as you go through or expend your digital inclusion fund?
I think one of the pieces that is interesting is around public Wi-Fi. And so we had some questions on public Wi-Fi, but separately we have a public Wi-Fi initiative. And what we found, we worked with the largest school district in San Jose, 22,000 students, one of the largest in California. When we put up that free public Wi-Fi network, we had like 6,000 families get on immediately. And so how public Wi-Fi fits into your overall strategy is a question I would add. The other thing is just make sure that you're working, it sounds like you already are working with someone who can really bring that academic rigor so you can defend that the numbers.
Hi, yeah, Phil Swan from Greater Manchester in the UK. You don't want to get locked into an individual telco, but you don't at the same time want your poles for your small cells to be looking like hedgehogs covered in lots of different weird bits of technology. How are you managing that balance so that you've got a level of vendor neutrality?
So a few ways. One is we are legally obligated to be competitively neutral, which means we have to work with everyone and offer them the same sort of deals. Two is design standards up front. So design standards help on both sides really streamline the process. And then three is we actually have our very smart GIS team created a self-service pole reservation system. So we don't have folks competing for the same poles and people understand where the equipment's going to be.
Another question? Shireen, you'll be at the rest of the conference. You'll be available to chat with people. Okay. The reason I say that is I think one of the values of these sorts of sessions is people get to know you and what you can contribute, and that the real conversation can take place there. And the reason I'm saying that is because we're out of time. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.